Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our event today. My name is Duncan Wood. I am the Vice President for Strategy and New Initiatives at the Wilson Center and the Acting Director of the Global Europe Program. This event on academic freedom under attack, authoritarian regimes and the battle for knowledge is a conversation that is part of a larger Wilson Center focus on the global rise of authoritarianism, an issue which, of course, is incredibly relevant in the global context. Today, we're going to take a closer look on the attacks on academic freedom in particular, as part of the conversation over freedom of expression. Extraordinarily grateful to my colleagues at the Mexico Institute, the Middle East Program, and the Latin American Program for helping to pull this event together. A especially big shout out to Teresa Eder of the Global Europe Program for her hard work in making this happen. I'm also very grateful to our Senior Vice President, Rob Litvak, for being here with us today to talk a little bit about an initiative at the Wilson Center that is central to these issues of academic freedom. Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Duncan. I would like to join Duncan in welcoming all to today's meeting on the threats to academic freedom. The Wilson Center was created by Congress to memorialize the United States' 28th president by serving as a bridge between the worlds of scholarship and public policy. Scholars is in our name. We are the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I would like to take this opportunity to tell you about a new Wilson Center initiative related to today's topic. The center recently launched a Threatened and Displaced Scholars initiative to offer residential fellowships to foreign scholars who face threats to their lives or their careers in their home countries. The new program seeks to provide a temporary institutional base for scholars who face threats because their research and actions have challenged their country's authoritarian regimes or because their countries face ongoing conflicts. Providing a safe haven to scholars at risk through this initiative responds to a pressing humanitarian crisis. With the threat of democracy around the globe, the threat to academic freedom has never been greater. In launching this initiative, the Wilson Center is delighted to be working with the Institute of International Education, which is a global network of partners offering practical support to threatened scholars. The Wilson Center will arrange a select number of fellowship appointments each year in cooperation with the IIE. The Wilson Center has offered at-risk scholars, practitioners, and activists fellowship opportunities on an ad hoc basis since the 1970s. The new initiative institutionalizes and amplifies these earlier arrangements to provide a more sustained measure of support. Threatened scholars selected through this initiative, and I should note the applications are handled by the Institute for International Education, will join the Wilson Center's residential community of scholars in Washington, D.C. So with that brief introduction, I will turn the floor back over to Duncan Wood, who will begin the proceedings. Thanks, Duncan.
Rob, thank you so much for describing this very important initiative for the Wilson Center, which hits at the heart of our mission, which is to bridge the gap between the worlds of academia and public policy. Today, we'll be discussing academic freedom, which is, of course, an important cornerstone of free societies everywhere. But often it is overlooked when people determine the health of a democracy because attacks on it can happen in the dark, hidden away from the public eye. We have to understand that authoritarian behavior exists along a continuum and ranges from verbal attacks on opponents, intolerance for different political and social perspectives, to freedom of the press and academia, to attacks on institutions and the weakening of checks and balances. Because universities are essentially about the search for knowledge and truth, they're usually one of the first targets of authoritarian leaders who want and need to control their societies to stay in power. Today, we're hosting academics from 4 different countries who have experienced these attacks on academic freedom to varying degrees. So let me introduce them to you right now. Andrea Petto is a professor in the Department of Gender Studies at Central European University, Vienna, Austria, and a Doctor of Science of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. She experienced the attacks of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán on the Central European University, which resulted in the university being forced out of the country. She personally also encountered censorship as a member of the Hungarian Accreditation Committee, which she left as a consequence. Aslihan Aykaç is a professor at the Department of International Relations, Ege University, Turkey. She has published extensively in Turkish media on universities, academic conduct, and academic freedom. The Turkish government has cracked down on universities in recent years and dismissed many academics from their posts based on emergency decrees. Catherine Andrews is a professor in the history division of the Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas, CIDE, in Mexico City. CIDE has been a battleground recently for academic freedom in Mexico. Academics there have been threatened to be prosecuted for organized and financial crimes, and have been calling for the dismissal of the new government-appointed director. Finally, and this will be the gentleman who will kick us off on our conversation today, Ernesto Medina Sandino is the former rector of the American University in Managua, Nicaragua, a position he held from 2007 to 2018. For his defense of the students who participated in the 2018 protests in Nicaragua, especially those who were expelled from public universities for political reasons, he has received threats against his life and that of his family. In July 2021, due to new threats received in the framework of the repressive wave of the Nicaraguan government unleashed at the beginning of the year against opponents and critics, he was forced to leave the country and is currently in Berlin, Germany, as a guest researcher at the Latin American Institute of the Free University, Berlin. Before I turn to Ernesto to lead us off, let me just say that, of course, we believe firmly in freedom of expression here, so please participate in this dialogue on issues of academic freedom. You can send your questions to gep@wilsoncenter.org by email or via Twitter to @WilsonCenterGEP. Thank you all for joining us today, sharing your personal experience with us. So as I said, we'll lead off with Ernesto, and then the batting order will be Andrea, Aslihan, and Kath. Ernesto, over to you.
Thank you, Duncan, for the kind introduction, and thank you to the organizer for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of information about the current situation of universities in Nicaragua. With the return to power of Daniel Ortega in 2007, the situation of universities, both public and private, has become complicated. In these years, it has become clear that the main interest of the Ortega government is to strengthen political control over universities, and for this, it continues to control and manipulate the election of authorities to ensure that people loyal to the government line occupy the main positions. To this end, they used the framework created by the law of autonomy of the institution of higher education, a law passed by the Sandinistas when they lost the elections in 1990, which limit trade unions and students' organizations only to organizations controlled by the Sandinista party. These students' organizations and teachers and non-teaching workers have, thanks to the law, a disproportionate representation in the different instances of the university government. Despite this control, university students played a very important role during the protests that took place from April 2018 against an intended reform of the Social Security law. Despite pressure from the university authorities, the students refused to be part of the Sandinista youth-led groups of civilians organized to repress civil society groups that had joined the protests in rejection of the violence exerted by the government to contain them. The increasing repression that led to more than 350 deaths, most of them young people, made the protests oriented to demand the departure of Ortega from power. A person who had ordered the firing of people's demonstrations, of peaceful demonstration, could not continue to lead the government. For universities and for the country as a whole, the Ortega regime and the violent end of the 2018 protest has come to a very high cost. In 2013, the National Assembly approved a law which made a 100-year concession to an obscure Chinese investor to build an interoceanic canal. The details of the concession were unknown, and there was no public discussion of the law. Universities were prohibited from holding forums or debates on the construction of the canal and its social and environmental impacts. Only the Nicaraguan Academy of Science organized forums with international specialists that were held at the Jesuit-run Central American University, UCA. In October 2014, Professor Salvador Montenegro, a member of the Nicaraguan Academy of Science, founder and director of the Aquatic Resource Research Center of the National University in Managua, was forced by political pressure to resign from his position as director of the center and had to retire from academic life for his criticism of the construction of the Interoceanic Canal and the danger this poses to Lake Nicaragua, the main freshwater reserve in the country. In 2016, Dr. Dionisio Rodriguez, also a member of the Nicaraguan Academy of Science, founder and director of the Institute of Geology and Geophysics of the National University in Managua, was removed from his position and forced to resign purely on political reasons for not being considered faithful to the Sandinista authorities of the university. Since 2018, the government has canceled the state budget contribution for the Nicaraguan Academy of Science. In universities, debates and research on the development of the COVID-19 pandemic were prohibited. Nicaragua has one of the highest under-registration of cases in the world. Doctors are prohibited from reporting COVID-19 as a cause of death. In April 2020, the authorities of the National Autonomous University in Managua dismissed Dr. Manuel Orozco, director of the Center for Research and Health Studies, the main center for training and research in public health in Nicaragua. His dismissal took place after giving statements to the independent media about the secrecy with which the government of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo was addressing the coronavirus health crisis. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 400 health professionals, many of them university teachers, have been fired for demanding better protective equipment and denouncing the government's inadequate measures to deal with the pandemic. During the protests of April and May 2018, in a country of 64 million people, 327 persons, mostly young students, were killed by police and paramilitary forces. 172 people remain in prison for political reasons, including several student leaders. Following the 2018 protests, 142 students were expelled from universities without respecting procedures set out in their statutes, and their academic records were withheld so that they cannot continue studies in any other university. Since then, thousands more students have had to leave the country for fear of repression. 108 university professors have been fired for supporting the protests and the students. An undetermined number has left the country so far. In Costa Rica alone, there are more than 200,000 Nicaraguans who have left Nicaragua in 2018 in search of asylum. Most of them students, young professionals, and peasants. In September 2020, 15 professors of the Faculty of Dentistry of the National University in León, most of them specialists, were dismissed for not supporting the official candidate in the election of Dean of the faculty. Lester Alemán and Max Jerez are two young student leaders who have been in prison since July 2021. Lester graduated recently, being in prison with a summa cum laude mention. Max was, during his 3 years of studies before retiring from the university in 2018, one of the top 10 students at the member universities of the National University Council of Nicaragua. Both were members of the delegations that participated in the national dialogues organized in agreement with the government in order to look for an end of the crisis. And both were recently sentenced after anomalous trials to 13 years in prison on the charge of undermining national integrity. At the beginning of 2022, the National Assembly of Nicaragua canceled the legal status and ordered the closure of 12 university institutions, 7 of them local universities that serve more than 25,000 students. In the case of the affected universities, everything indicates that it is also another step on the part of the government of Daniel Ortega to silence any possibility of protest or claims that may come from the universities and their students. With this bleak outlook, there is very little chance that Nicaragua will emerge from the difficult situation in which it finds itself if a peaceful and democratic solution to the current crisis is not reached soon and the country returns to the democratic path with justice and freedom. Thank you.
Ernesto, thank you so much for beginning this conversation in such a passionate and also analytical way. It's clear that it was difficult for you to talk about a lot of those issues, and really appreciate your candor. Let me also say that I think you laid so many of the important issues surrounding academic freedom and the tools that governments use to try to control universities on the table. The use of budgets, the use of threats to the physical integrity of people, and the fact that this was in the context of COVID, I think is particularly important as well, because it's an issue that we've seen being used across the globe. So thank you very much for beginning this dialogue, Ernesto. I'm now going to turn to Andrea Peto. Andrea.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be on this panel. I'm especially grateful and honored to have the chance to talk after this extremely important and moving talk. And I would like to start by sharing my screen, but I don't know. Okay, it doesn't work. So what I would like to say is that, first of all, thank you very much for supporting CEU in this long battle, but Duncan was already mentioning. It has been 3 years and we have lost. I mean, it happens, we have lost, but there is another day. So there are other fights to wage. So in this very short 5-minute contribution, I would like to talk about my experience as a totally unlikely heroine, I have to say, who found herself in 3 different axes of struggle. Then I would like to talk about the previous explanatory factors. I would like to offer something new. And then I would like to end up with what kind of lessons we can learn from these attacks. So the 3 types of attacks in which, not only me, but several scholars found themselves started with the Lex CEU, that CEU had to move from Hungary to Austria. And the second attack is that the gender studies, 2-year gender studies MA program was deleted from the accredited study list without any explanation. And that is a part of the what they call the so-called anti-gender campaign, when illiberal forces are using gender as symbolic glue to glue together different political forces to create a very strange alliance to fight against liberal values. And the third is the appropriation of the Holocaust narrative by illiberal forces. As we all know, the present war against Ukraine is led by the Russian president, allegedly fighting against the so-called Nazis. So this kind, and I'm a historian, a scholar who is has been working on the history of the Second World War from a gender perspective, and I never thought that I find myself in this position that the liberal forces find that so important, the three fields I'm working on. So the previous explanatory frameworks for this very strange and extremely kind of dangerous mixture are that this is a backlash, this is an authoritarian revival of authoritarianism, this is mafia state, this is democratic authoritarianism. You know that political scientists love, ready to die for a new terminology. So we also coined a new term, which is the polypore states. Before you start Googling, this polypore is this mushroom which lives on the trunk of the tree and produces nothing else than the polypore. And with my colleague Veronika Grzebalska, we were arguing that this is a new form of governance, which is producing parallel institutions. Just think about the tree and the mushroom, and it privileges the familialism, not family policy, but certain families. Not all families are equal, and it works with security narrative. Everything becomes a threat. Instead of policies, there are always threats, real and imaginary threats. So what did we learn from this, if we use and apply this particular terminology, which I, of course, understand sounds very biologizing, but at the end, I would like to offer some suggestions how to use this particular metaphor to fight against this illiberal appropriation of science and academia. So what we learned, I mean, what I learned, let's put it this way, what I learned in these previous years is this, the weakness of the European infrastructure, which we hope to protect, the different institutions and values. I also learned the reactive reactions and the lack of political imagination, that most of the discussion is following the line and the direction what the liberal forces are actually setting up. And also that there are very few scholars who actually warned us that there is a kind of a transnational policy transfer between the different illiberal governments. And that's why, let me pause here for a second and again cherish and thank for this event, because it helps us to give a kind of overview of what's happening globally. And we can also think about kind of transnational alliances to fight against these forces. And what we also learned from these attacks is that the state capture, that's also a kind of category which is used describing what is happening, that the state capture actually uses higher education as a very lucrative business, and giving opportunities and high salaries for those who are loyal to the government and who are ready to ignore critical thinking and apply self-censorship. And in that particular context, they are also hijacking academic authorization system. So, and that, let me connect this to the introduction, but the very kind introduction Duncan gave about me, namely that the Hungarian Accreditation Committee also was accredited by the European Accreditation Agency at the moment when the Lex CEU was passed, when the Gender Studies MA was deleted. So that already shows that there is a problem with the whole academic authorization system, which is allegedly neutral. But of course, the present neutrality serves the needs of and the political agenda of the liberal forces, which set up this particular state, the polypore state, which doesn't have any original ideas, just uses the institutions and ideas of the previously existing institutions, and they are also using universities, research institutes for their own political purpose. What to do? What to do when you think that you cannot do anything? So I have got two suggestions. One is related to the attention what we got. I started my intervention saying that, you know, I'm a historian who spends her time in archives reading different testimonies and documents, and suddenly my work and the work of my colleagues became very important. So many colleagues are reading what we are saying and writing. So this attention, this public attention, is a political possibility, and it opens up lots of opportunities for us to say something meaningful, which hasn't been the case before, because, you know, gender studies scholars had been working either in the attic or in the cellar. They were, you know, very nice and accepted. But here, by now, it's clear that the fight for gender studies is the fight for academic freedom and also for liberal values for all. And my second suggestion is just going back to the issue of my resignation from the Hungarian Accreditation Committee. The reason was that the president of the Accreditation Committee wanted me to withdraw a peer-reviewed academic article in the Berichte für Wissenschaftsgeschichte. This is a German journal of academic journal, peer-reviewed academic journal. And of course, I could not do this. But as a result, this particular article I wrote in this Berichte für Wissenschaftsgeschichte, the title is "The Liberal Academic Authority, an Oxymoron," became the most read article in this journal, which is very important for history of science scholars, but it hasn't been read so far. So a political possibility to transform academic spaces and academic publication as a form of activism. So thanks again for the possibility, and I just would like to radiate optimism and a kind of some suggestions for the future. And thanks again.
Andrea, thank you so much. I think you began very, very well by saying we lost, but we live to fight another day. And that's such an important point to remember in these cases, which is that we're going to lose battles along the way, but the war itself to defend academic freedom is a longer one. I'm now going to turn to Aslihan Aytaç to talk about the Turkish case. Aslihan.
Thank you. And I would like to thank Ernesto and Andrea, because their narratives were so similar to what I'm going to be talking about. It was just incredible, the parallels. So I'm just going to touch upon certain points about how things run in Turkey, and then I will, make a general conclusion about it. So the first thing that I want to refer to is the institutional framework that the Turkish academia is subject to, and the recent changes, especially after 2016. Particularly. So we have this Council of Higher Education where all the universities are, tied to as the governing body. Let's say the head and the board members of the Council of Higher Education are appointed by the president. So that's number one. University rectors or presidents of universities are appointed by the president since 2016. And then we have this Inter-University Council, which provides accreditation to foreign degrees for scholars coming from abroad. And they also give this rank of associate professorship. They're also chosen by the university presidents appointed by the president again. So it's all tying up to the same end. And so another extension is that since 2006, for the last 15 years, there have been 77 universities, new universities established in Turkey. We have more than 8 million university students. And this is just amazing. It's a huge number. And if you think infrastructure-wise, if you think about the faculty and staff that is required to, to work in these 77 universities, you could understand that it's a big task to take over in such short notice. And the thing is, of course, this is a way of basically granting free diplomas to your voters. So there is an interesting deal there. I just want to say this. And in general, institutionally speaking, there's limited diversity in terms of the framework and no meritocratic standards whatsoever to determine, who qualifies to be in these boards and presidents and whatnot. So that's one issue. The second issue has to do with the material basis for academics. So basically, the recruitment process is one. The granting of funding is another problem. The third, for example, promotions to associate or full professorships. They are all becoming much more difficult. But the worst situation is not for mid-career academics or senior academics, but for the younger generations who are trying to find the motivation to enter into academia. And then all of that opportunity is really based on nepotism. Either you have to qualify ideologically or you have to know the right kind of person. And that's, of course, killing the whole spirit of, apprenticeship, let me say, of bringing up quality scholars who are going to make significant, contribution in the academia. So that's the second issue. As I said, it's starting from recruitment up until promotions, and it's very difficult. Now, the third and probably the most important thing, I would say, issues regarding the content of research and how that's being monitored, censored to a certain extent, or funding provided for research is very much based on the content of that research. So we have difficulties there as well. There are certain types of research that's promoted, and many of the other issues are kind of expelled from the agenda. There is intense monitoring and pressure of content of research. Certain topics are definitely off limits from research. For example, Turkey has a huge issue with the Syrian refugee influx. We have the highest rate of refugees in the world. And at one moment in the last 5 years, research on Syrian refugees was subject to permission from the Council of Higher Education. And that's kind of, actually, maybe that's going to generate policy options for you. So it's going to be good for the government. But if you ban that, that becomes something very difficult to go on. In a recent incident, for example, a graduate of Binghamton University was not granted accreditation for his degree because his research topic was about authoritarianism. So the weird situation there, imagine that. So outside of that, we're always talking about the research agenda, but beyond that, when you think about campus life, extracurricular activities taking place on campus, for example, inviting a speaker to campus, that's also being monitored. So that's another difficulty about freedom of speech. You want any kind of opinion to appear on campus so that your students will be exposed to all sorts of ideas. And then when you can't do that, that kind of becomes another limitation for freedom of thought. So critical assessment, again, similar to Ernesto's case about the pandemic, about, for example, hazardous chemicals in food products. There was another issue about that, or about any kind of political conflict can be taken to court, or on the basis of that, that person can be expelled from university, even taken to prison. So that's also another, pressure on the people in order to abide by the existing establishment. So do we have, beyond these, three major issues, do we have any kind of resistance? There are four major issues that I would like to underline here because they've been prominent in their struggle against authoritarianism, against, pressure on freedom, academic freedom in general. One was the Academics for Peace. This is a group of academics who have signed a peace petition against a military intervention in Southeast Turkey. And most of these people have been expelled from their universities through a presidential decree right after the attempted coup in Turkey. And of course, that's a major loss because of, scientific inquiry accumulates in these people. So we're not supposed to lose the faculty there. Currently, after, more than a year, we're observing a Boğaziçi University resistance where the president of the university was appointed again from outside, and the faculty kind of formed a resistance group against that. That appointed president was laid off after 6 months. So that's like a short victory because a new one came again in line with the political agenda of the government. So the struggle continues there. What they want is a democratically elected president by the faculty, and that's not taking place. A very strong union of education workers, Eğitim Sen, I think is very important here in terms of voicing the struggles and the demands of the education faculty, not only in tertiary education, but also in secondary one. And of course, I have to underline the fact that we are facing incredible brain drain in Turkey. Most of the people who cannot take this oppression have to flee the country. And it's very sad because we're losing social capital. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing in the country. As way of conclusion, I would like to underline that institutional autonomy is very important for the maintenance of academic freedom. And so democratically elected boards and presidents are very important. Also, academic objectives and standards and the pace of achieving those standards have to be determined by the faculty and not imposed from above. I think that's also something very important. And I think, one last thing that I want to mention, we never talk about the private sector and private universities. I work in a public university as well, but I think institutional autonomy of the academia has to be autonomous from the state and from the capital. So therefore, by running away from political pressure, we're not supposed to be subject to economic pressure. And that's also something that's very important, I think. And I thank you for listening to me.
Dr. Aykaç, that was fantastic. And thank you for bringing up the issue of human and social capital. And of course, when we're talking about universities losing particularly young academics, we're losing not just them, but all of the people that they would train as well in the future. And it's that cascading effect throughout future generations. To close us out on this first round, I'm going to turn to Kath Andrews, who will discuss the Mexican case and in particular, CIDE University. Kath, over to you.
Sorry, I'm afraid it's all gone horribly pear-shaped. I'm sorry, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to Andrea, to Ernesto, and Asilan. Andrea, I also am a historian and feminist thought and political institutions, and also I found myself much against my best wishes in the center of various storms because of it. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what's been happening in Mexico in the last few years. I'm going to start, I can't help it, with a bit of history, and then I'm going to just run through some of the things that I find most concerning about what's happening at the moment. So the election of Andrés Manuel López Obrador as president of Mexico in 2018, brought ideological arguments not seen since the early 20th century back into the debate around the role of higher education in Mexican society. Revolutionary governments of the 20s and the 30s, the last century, had wanted socialism to be the defining feature of public education, and they believed that dialectic materialism was a scientific methodology which allowed students to correctly analyze the social, economic, and political moment they were living in. And as a result, they lobbied and tried to impose socialist education as the framework of the state and public university curricula. In this context, then, universities pushed to gain autonomy, that's to say independence in matters of curricula and appointments, which is just what Aslan was talking about. It's the most important thing to ensure academic freedom. And of course, Mexican universities never got economic finance. The downside of autonomy is that you have the autonomy for your internal matters, but you depend on the public purse. If we fast forward to a century, we're back to López Obrador, he interprets the Mexican democratic transition, as it used to be called, of the 80s and the 90s as a perversion of these revolutionary ideas. A close reading of his speeches since he became president shows he often underscores the role that academics played in this transition with considerable rancor. For him, we are the principal architects and beneficiaries of the neoliberal economic reforms that were enacted by governments after 1982. As a result, he argues academic life is one of undeserved privileges, huge financial rewards, and little service to the public good. As is a politician also who dislikes criticism, he also rejects academic research which does not support his policies or his political statements. And from his point of view, all criticism of his actions come from privileged minorities who are defending their own selfish interests, such as myself. From this perspective, the proper role of academics working in public institutions is to produce research that will support his policies and educate Mexico's young people in such a way as they will want to ally themselves to his political party, which is known as Morena in Spanish. López Obrador believes that academic institutions need to be reformed to root out privilege and force them to work for the public good. Their research and teaching's priorities need to be refocused so that they contribute to his government's goals. And above all, academics should refrain from criticizing him or his government in the public sphere. This is evidenced, for example, in the new science and technology law, which has been proposed to Congress since the last 2 years, but hasn't been passed yet, which proposes that the government should establish a state agenda and impose these research priorities on public higher education institutions. Similarly, the National Science and Technology Council, which functions a little bit like the one in Turkey, although not all, there are different bodies that govern different universities. My institution forms part of the National Science and Technology Council, and we are subject to it. And it also oversees scholarships, fellowships, research grants, and other things. And this has been reorganized around 10 national problems, as they're called. All postgraduate degrees that receive funding from CONACYT must demonstrate their commitment to one of the or more of these problems. And so, as a result, this policy has led to more than a 50% reduction in postgraduate grants, and obviously a reduction in the themes and the topics that can be researched, because without public funds, it's difficult to do this research. And finally, in this sense, the government abolished the trust funds which public education institutes had, which allowed them to administer grants and private projects and from NGOs and other sources. And this makes us completely dependent now on tax money and thus on the government's whims. His policy towards higher education has been clearly demonstrated in the events surrounding the designation of the new director at the Centre for Research and Teaching in Economics, where I'm a professor and served as provost until November last year. Here, a candidate favoured by CONACYT and the president was imposed on the centre in a designation process which openly flouted the centre's bylaws and procedures. To justify this attack, the supporters of CONACYT and the president denounced CIDE as an institution of self-interested academics whose research and teaching only serve private interests and not the public good. They hope that the new director will force us to abandon our neoliberal inclinations and make its research and teaching programme more palatable. As the new director admitted to me, part of this plan is to create a hostile environment which will lead to the departure of most of the current academic staff. These professorships will then be awarded to people allied to Morena. Another example of the present government's attitude can be seen in the relationship between the Director General of CONACYT, the National Council of Science and Technology, and the current Attorney General of Mexico, Alejandro Gertz Manero. The Attorney General has been the rector of the University of Americas, a private institution in Mexico City since 1995. And in this role, he has tried a number of times to form part of the prestigious national system of researchers, which CONACYT administers. It's a list of all of us who you obtain a place on that list via peer review. And he's never been able to get onto this because he hasn't got the academic production necessary for this. And before 2018, various academic committees pointed this out to him, and they also pointed out they had indulged in plagiarism on more than one occasion. However, as if by magic, after López Obrador was elected, he was suddenly allowed to join the system. In fact, the CONACYT organized a special committee ad hoc to look at his case and give him the highest award, the highest level in this system. And when academics protested about his plagiarism and put in a complaint to the ethics committee of CONACYT, we had another special committee appointed to decide whether Gertz Manero had committed plagiarism. This committee ruled last week that no, they couldn't decide because the people that Gertz Manero had plagiarized are dead and thus had not been able to make the complaint themselves. And if they were not making the complaint could not be processed. Also in 2001, the Attorney General opened investigations into Álvarez Bulla, that's the Director General of CONACYT, predecessor as leader of CONACYT, and 30 other academics on the charge of organised crime and embezzlement. I must say here that 4 of these professors belong to my institution, including precisely the former Director General of CONACYT. The charges related to financial support that CONACYT had given to the Science and Technology Consulting Forum, which was part of CONACYT, provided for in law during the ex-director's tenure as director of CONACYT. What Gertz Manero wanted to do, or his office wanted to do, was to retrospectively apply the reforms to this law, which abolished the forum in 2020, so that they applied to his period and implied that the payments made to this forum were illegal, and because it was various people in CONACYT took part in the processing and the administrative details needed to make these payments, so they were involved in organised crime. You must understand that organised crime is a charge which means that there is no recourse to face the inquiry in your home. You are to be imprisoned, and the proposal was to imprison these 31 academics in the most high security prison in Mexico State. This luckily so far has not happened because 2 judges have refused to violate the Constitution, the 14th article, which prohibits the retrospective application of the law. But Gertz Manero just last week said that the process had not been finished and he was going to continue following it within his office. Also, as rector of the Americas University, Gertz Manero has interest in his institution, sister University in Puebla, which is a city to the east of Mexico City, about an hour and a half or an hour if it's good roads. He's maintained since the early 2000s a legal battle with this university over the use of logos, which both universities had, and the copyright for these logos. And it's a dispute about who is the real University of the Americas, whether that in Puebla or in Mexico City. And currently, the university is also embroiled in a legal battle over the management of the trust fund, which finances the Puebla University of the Americas. The disagreement derives from the expulsion of one of the members of this fund, Guillermo Jenkins de Landa, in 2013, and his subsequent legal bid to wrest control of this trust from the rest of the Jenkins family. The Jenkins family is a US original family who they arrived in Mexico in the early 20th century and made a considerable fortune among other things in cinema. Before 2018, that is to say, before López Obrador was elected, Jenkins de Landa had no luck in his legal bid to gain control of this trust fund. But most sorpresa, what a surprise, in 2018, things suddenly changed. Thus, in April of 2021, a judge ruled preliminary in favor of Jenkins de Landa, and so the Morena, that's the government party of Puebla, Miguel Barbosa, ordered the occupation of the university campus in San Andrés Cholula by state police. And as a result of this action, Armando Rios Peter was declared rector of the university, deposing the former rector, Luis Ernesto Derbez. And in August of that year, warrants were issued for the arrest of Derbez, as well as the vice rectors of administration and finance and the director of legal affairs at the University of Puebla for embezzlement. And warrants were also issued for the arrest of the lawyers who were defending these people. Now, at the end of this last year, 2021, these decisions were overturned in the tribunals, and it was ruled that the original management, the original group that controlled the trust fund and controlled the university in Puebla, should remain in control of this foundation. However, it wasn't until February, that's at least 4 months later, that the state police retired from the Cholula campus, allowing staff and students to return. So the campus was occupied for over 9 months by state police. And I must mention that when the state police arrived, there were classes in progress and professors giving classes and administrative people in their offices, and they were forcibly ejected by the state police, all carrying long machine guns and other unpleasant types of weapons. So really, to conclude, López Obrador's government has a hostile attitude to academic institutions, and the attacks in Mexico on academic freedom are being carried out in the name of anti-corruption, in the name of the public good. Academic communities and students are being stigmatized and persecuted for their alleged opposition to the government because they are corrupt, because they are protecting their privileges, or they're protecting their self-interest, because we are enemies of the state. And in this way, our situation is comparable to those have been discussed thus far. And I would similarly mention that the United States also has serious problems in this regard. If we see recent events in Florida or Texas, that US politicians are equally liable to feel threatened by academics and their research. So we really must unite our voices in defense of academic freedoms everywhere, for the good of academics and academic institutions, but above all, because academic freedom is the best antidote to authoritarianism and dictatorship. And if we don't defend it, we have no defense against these actions by the state against us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kath. In-depth, not just description, but analysis of the situation in Mexico. And I'm very grateful that you linked it together with not just attacks on universities, but attacks on scientists, on science itself, which is one of the issues which I think we're seeing evolving or unfurling throughout the world. And yes, you're absolutely right in your closing comments. Here in the United States, in Great Britain, in European countries, we're not immune from that. This is something which is a more and more common phenomenon. We're beginning to get questions from the audience, and so I'm grateful for that. And just to remind everybody, if you'd like to send in a question, please email us at gep@wilsoncenter.org or send us a question on Twitter to @WilsonCenterGEP. I have a question which I'm going to pose to the group, and please decide how you want to answer this question. Don't have to give a completely comprehensive, but from your perspective and your experience. The first question is a very simple yet complex one, which is, why are universities such a threat to authoritarian leaders and governments, but also why are they so useful and important to them? I think we've heard a number of points which I had not considered really before this session. I've understood that they can be a threat. I'd like you to talk about, in what ways they're threats, but also that point that a couple of you have made about how useful they are in terms of clientelism and rewarding followers, punishing opponents. So why don't we begin with Ernesto again, and then we'll work through Andrea, Aslihan, and Kath. Ernesto, you're still muted. There you go.
Yes, thank you again. Well, in the case of Nicaragua, it's clear that autonomous free universities are a threat to a government that is trying to impose a way of thinking and a way of acting. Ortega still thinks in those terms. He thinks that the revolution is the revolution of the 70s that supported only without any limits the struggle against the dictatorship. And he considers that the university is part of his project. He do not accept or do not think that the best for the country is a completely free and autonomous university. And of course, the university play also a role in the sense that authoritarian regimes, whether they like it or not, they every day they lose support of different sectors of society that do not accept the way things are going. And universities so far have been, I don't know why really, and that's one of my main concerns, why universities so easily have been controlled by Ortega and transformed through giving positions to people sympathetic to them, through scholarships and things that were already mentioned, that are destroying the university, because the very idea of the university where you have to be free to do research, to discuss, to question things, that it's not possible in a university that is a mean to control people and to force people to believe in one idea that comes from above. So that's why I think a free autonomous university is incompatible with an authoritarian regime. They do not exist together.
Thank you. Andrea.
Thank you. This is a fantastic question. But your question implies that there is one model of universities, but there are several models of universities, and this is part of the problem, right? So if you will look at the origins of the university, universitas, right, which was first was established in the framework of the church, and then it fought through for autonomy, and also that the knowledge production, the knowledge transfer, and the academic authorization should be only dependent on the peer group. And this is the principle, right? And this is the principle. And we see that there are basically two models for this, because somebody has to pay for this. One is the kind of German model, the Humboldtian model, when the aim of the university is to create good citizens of the state. It has an agenda. There was this was always there, that they have to have these good citizens. And there is the other model, which is financed by private individuals, and that is the Anglo-Saxon model, which is, you know, creating funds and then giving the organization and the governance to the different design bodies. But the question is that who is actually paying for this is always curtaining the academic freedom. But so academic freedom is a utopian concept we should all strive for, but definitely something which should be implemented in different models of universities. And this illiberal turn in academic science policy has not come from nowhere. There were always different models of these illiberal forms of university education. And if you think about Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, I mean, there were universities there as well. And also the different religious universities, they are called universities, but they are operating on a very different model. So again, let me be the person glass half full and suggest that we should look for the different new models which are developing and against this kind of illiberal takeover of the university structure, which in some countries led by states. And that's what we have heard in Turkey, in Mexico, Nicaragua, in Hungary, in Poland, in Russia. Then the state capture also captures any spaces of resistance. And in that particular context, the neoliberalization of the university system actually caused lots of harm, because it also emptied the resistance, the strengths of resistance, and also the university structures. When somebody is only interested in profit, teaching deliverables, the ECTS, it became a kind of conveyor belt type of production, degree production. And that's why, if we want to think about what to do when you cannot do anything, is to take one step back and go back to the origins of the university. And there are, you don't have to invent the warm water. I just want to bring in one example. These are the flying universities during communism. I'm also one of those who had the privilege, because I'm old enough, to be a part of this flying universities, where there was nothing about credit transfer, there was nothing about the teaching deliverables, there was nothing about outcomes. I mean, all this neoliberal governance language was missing. Why we were studying is the sheer value production of knowledge, and also because we thought that this knowledge will help us to create a better world. And so universities matters, spaces of creating knowledge and spaces for academic authorization matters, because, in these flying universities, those professors were teaching who had no chance to teach in the state universities. So we have to rethink at this moment of time, all this knowledge production, transfer, and authorization process. And I think that we are on a good track to use some of the good historical examples and learn from that. Thank you.
Andrea, I think you've just given us the perfect reason why historians matter. To be able to put these things in context and to say, this is not necessarily a new phenomenon. We have to understand, what universities are and the different models that you talked about. I think it's fantastic. I need to be perfectly transparent with you all. As you noticed, the number of people who are on the technical side dropped off this call. It seems as though we've had major technical issues at the Wilson Center. So whilst we're still recording this event right now, we're no longer live being broadcast. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to continue so that we can get the recording of this up online afterwards. Apparently, it's been a major collapse of the internet at the Wilson Center right now. So Aslihan, I'd like to turn to you and for your perspective on this question.
Okay. Basically, when you ask the question, I went back to this authoritarianism aspect of it. I mean, what do we understand by authoritarianism essentially? So it doesn't have room for pluralism. So I'm going to contrast this with what we understand out of university. That's why I'm starting with this. So authoritarianism has no room for pluralism. It means centralization of power in all ways and preservation of that power. So it's against change. Okay, it wants to maintain what it is. And of course, the use of political power for economic interests. So there is that kind of an elite alliance aspect of authoritarianism as well. So if this is the agenda, how is scientific thinking a threat to this? Because scientific thinking is skeptic. It's always asking questions and it's always questioning with what if? So what if it wasn't authoritarianism is one of the questions that it's going to pose. And of course, people are going to begin to think about this. The other thing that scientific thinking pursues is change. So it could be social change, it could be technological change, it could be innovative projects or processes maybe, but change is again a challenge to authoritarianism. And I think for these very simple reasons that authoritarian governments cannot really handle scientific inquiry. But on the other hand, you know, going back to Althusser maybe, and thinking of the university as an ideological apparatus, which is what's taking place right now when you open 77 universities all of a sudden, they become representatives of your ideology. They help you engineer certain social segments, and then, you know, create a collective identity on the basis of your ideological goals, let's say. So because of that, they become instrumentalized. And that's actually very sad, because at that moment, there is nothing about scientific inquiry or building a paradigm or creating a paradigmatic shift or anything of that sort. Then it loses all the essence of the scientific institution.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And to wrap up this first round of questions, Kath?
Yes, I think I'd like to say in response to the questions, why universities are important and why are they a threat? The answers are pretty much it's the same. It's the two sides of the same coin. I'm going to give an answer from my perspective in Mexico, obviously. The thing that for us in Mexico, academics in Mexico has been one of the worst aspects of all this, is the fact that the people leading the charge against us are fellow academics, people that we've worked with all our lives, and who have benefited and been awarded the same grants and given the same fellowships that we've all had. The current director of CONACYT had a grant to study her doctorate in the United States. She's had a fellowship to work in the United States, but all of a sudden these things are disloyal and they must be criticized. So part of the problem from our perspective is that it's an internal battle. And what we're seeing in many aspects, I would say, are old scores being settled about academic feuds that date back decades. The fact that there's an academic feud which explains what's happened in CDE and why we're here. It's not a surprise that the new imposed director, I would call him that because I don't want to recognise his legitimacy, obviously, used to be is somebody who got his master's here before the 90s, when there was lots of changes, which could be called neoliberal in the organisation of CDE, you know? And the people behind his imposition were also professors at CDE. The other thing is that university professors in general tend to be respected in general society. One of the funny aspects of the whole controversy about Gertz Manero being let into the system, the national system of researchers, or the question about his plagiarism, is that he craves the recognition of his peers. He wants to be part of the respected academic community. No? And so he then tries to get in, but he's getting in a way that I would consider completely unacceptable. No? And so we're playing with the importance of universities is also there. His interest in participating is because it gives him legitimacy. And academic discourse in general gives legitimacy to public figures, because in general, academics up to this point in Mexico have been respected. And so part of the discourse from the presidential pulpit is precisely to say, don't respect them, because they are your enemies. They're not working for your good. Because López Obrador, a bit like Daniel Ortega, believes himself to be the disciple of revolutionary ideas. He has come to reorganize and reform and transform, as it says, the fourth transformation, which is to re-establish revolutionary ideas. He is the disciple of the people, or the predicate, the servant of the people, to use the expression that's now very popular because of the war in Ukraine. And also, I think we ought to point out to conclude in this section is that the discourse which López Obrador's government sustains is based on misinformation, illusion, delusion, how things they think ought to be, and never have any basis in any discernible evidence or fact. And thus academics are certainly very, very dangerous to this, because academics say, why? Show me why, show me where, show me how, show me who. And he is unable to show where, how, and who. And this, our discourse is just very, very dangerous, because what López Obrador wants is just to say all the governments before me were terribly corrupt, and I'm going to save you all. My policies are all wonderful. They have reduced poverty. More people are receiving public assistance. I have established a public health policy that's helping millions of people. When the reality is, none of these things are true. Less people receive public benefit than they did. They receive less money. More people who are better off receive more public handouts. No, their public health system has not worked, and it is not working, so much so that they've had to reorganize and yesterday say they're going to start it again and change the name and change it all to try again. We're dangerous because we want to see the evidence, and we ask to see the evidence, and when we don't see it, we speak up. And I think this makes us really dangerous indeed.
Thank you, Kath. All of you for that response. We are pretty much at time on this event. We have a number of questions out there. There's one that we could answer relatively quickly, and that is for you, Andrea, which is about the future. The question is, what happens with CEU if Orban does not get re-elected? Are there plans to go back to Hungary? And so I'd like to end on some kind of optimistic, looking to the future note. How can we actually bounce back from these defeats, hopefully temporary defeats?
Thank you. Thank you. I think these defeats are extremely educational. First, because we learned that academic work and higher education matters. I'm sure you have met lots of colleagues who were saying, I have to teach another class, another course, I'm tired. And now this has changed because they recognize that this is a privilege to have access to students and to teach. So, this is one of the good results, right? That everybody recognized that the stakes are horribly high. Because it requires self-reflection, each of us, that have we prepared each and every course we had, every class, every consultation? Did we do our best? I think these are the questions we have to ask. Now when the stakes are really high, then we cannot allow ourselves to make mistakes. And because the illiberals recognize, I'm using this term illiberals just for the sake of underlining that we are talking about a fight, socialization, a fight for liberal values. And the stakes are high because I'm sure you have seen this new network of universities which were set up, the new network of think tanks which are developing exactly to create what Aslilan was describing, this kind of free space, paid space, and also a space where all these ideas can be disseminated. So as far as the CEU is concerned, I'm personally, and I think my colleagues are very grateful to Austria, which offered a safe haven for us. And moving a university from one country to another while the education is on, this was really difficult. So what CEU really wants to have now is a kind of peaceful time, which is extremely difficult now when Russia attacked Ukraine. So during COVID, but because academics need time and space to think and work on their work. But maybe this is the time to think about, again, to knowledge production, that how and what kind of ways knowledge is produced and how to disseminate it. And as far as the CEU campus in Budapest is concerned, some of you might have been visited. This is a fantastic campus in the city, and it is still the possession of the CEU. It hasn't been confiscated or nationalized or whatever, which was also in the cards, but luckily it did not happen. So this campus now is the space for the breakaway part of the Theatre and Film Academy, because they protested against the takeover of the government, and they created an alternative university, which is now hosted by the CEU campus. And this is a very good model, that you don't have to collaborate. You can create an alternative space, and this University of Theatre and Film, they are offering the same courses by the same people, but the academic authorization is coming from 5 different schools of film and theater in Europe. So that's a very good example. So and also in this campus, the Democracy Institute also operates, which is a space where the CEU academics are trying to share their knowledge and their insight with the Hungarian community in Hungarian. And I was teaching a course there with my colleague Andrea Tompa, who is a writer, and Petra Bakos, who is a PhD student and a yoga instructor, about the politics of happiness. And this was an interdisciplinary course about, moving away this very kind of stupid hooray optimism, and also by the different chemically induced happiness, and doing happiness as a meaningful life of dignifying human life. And this is what we are actually fighting for. And the part of the of this dignified human life, also the access and the right to academic and scholarly inquiry. So what will happen after the election in Hungary on the 3rd of April? There will be a 4th of April, and whatever will be the result, we will continue to fight for this academic freedom. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists today, to Ernesto, Andrea, Aslihan, and Kath. It's clear that we've only really scratched the surface of this issue. I very much want to stay in touch with each and every one of you, and to continue to have a focus on these issues and your cases in particular through the Wilson Center. It's of enormous importance. I look forward to continuing that conversation, and please let us know in Washington what it is that we can do to help you along the way. Thank you to our audience for listening and watching today. I know that we've had some technical issues along the way, but we've managed to get through it. We'll have the recording. And with that, let me just say thank you for the Wilson Center. Please continue to watch our programming, and we will continue to focus on issues of great importance such as this. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. It's a pleasure.
Bye, Ernesto. Aslihan, Andrea.
Hasta luego.
Kath.
Abrazos.
Ciao.
Adiós,
Bye-bye.
Abrazos.